Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 31 of Kur's Rage, part 1 of the Duaredheim staff saga, by me, starting at page 321. The party is now facing the aftermath of battle with Crunch's war party of Red Orcs. Okay, stop right where we left off. The battle was over. Her friends and foes lay all about the battlefield. There were few sounds save the ever-howling wind. Running out among the fallen, she searched for signs of life, looking for those in greatest need of healing. Kalor had pulled the orc's foul bolt out of himself, but the pain of the act had caused him to black out. His breathing was steady, though, and he seemed out of danger for the moment. Running down slope, she found Carmen pinned beneath the enormous tree trunk, and her face was deathly pale. "Bring the horses," Tarek said, spitting blood and stumbling. "Alger and the others will be able to pull the tree off of her, quickly." And then he spoke to them, calming them and telling them of their need. Staggering between them, he tied their strongest ropes between the tree and their saddle horns. "Karina, use that heavy limb to lever the tree away from her as we pull." His words were gentle but firm, and many of them had no human translation, but the horses understood him completely, and lo, pull they did, and Carmen was freed. "I'm sorry, Karina, but I can do no more. My lungs are punctured, and I'm drowning in my own blood. I have taken my last step." He knelt in the snow, his hurts slipping away. "Not yet you haven't," Karina said, remembering the healing potions. She quickly found Dartin and Leander. Dartin still had 4 left in his pack. It was a miracle that they weren't broken. He looked pretty bad, so she poured one down his throat, and its magic made him drink. Leander just had a bump on his head, it seemed, so she left him and raced back to Tarek. He was unconscious and no longer breathing. He'd entered a dream. His mother and father were both waiting for him. He saw his people, alive again as they were in his youth. They called to him, and he was running, but something suddenly pulled him back, beckoning for his return. He could breathe again. His pain had returned. The dream seemed nicer, but it would have to wait. Karina went again to Carmen, and she knew that her pale color was the result of the suffocating weight of the tree upon her chest. The pressure was now gone, but she still wasn't breathing, and her heart beat faintly. She administered their third and second to the last potion. Carmen's heart beat strongly, and her breathing resumed. Her armor had held once again, and her ribs were unbroken. The alchemist's magic continued to work, but Karina was already off to find the others. She found Kur lying in a pool of his own blood. He had lain there for some time, trying to stop the flow of blood with his hands, but they had finally grown too weak for that, and he appeared dead. That little paragraph is a memory that my great-uncle John Anderson told me about when he was wounded in northern Sicily when he was fighting the Germans during World War II. He had been shot 4 times, twice in the chest, and he thinks struck with a mortar round, blown him out of his foxhole. And he laid in a pool of his own blood, trying to stop the flow of it with his hands, going in and out of consciousness for over 24 hours. And he was rescued by Jehovah's Witnesses in red robes who walked the battlefield with no protection whatsoever, carrying the dead and the wounded back off the battlefield. So, he had huge respect for the Jehovah's Witness. Anyway, let's continue. She bent low over his mouth, and to her surprise, she felt a gentle stirring there, but his blood stained the mountainside. tablets remained before he would die. She had their last potion, and she knew not where Tao was. There was no time. She gave the draught to Kur. She was terrified. Searching in anguish, she saw Dartin kneeling beside her fallen husband. "Be calm," Dartin said. "He's badly hurt, but I am ready." Dao's right arm was broken, his shoulder dislocated, and where the bull's horns had taken him in the belly, a large bruise was spreading. Something inside of him had broken. "Karina, we need you now more than ever. Build a fire, a great fire. We must keep the wounded warm until I can tend to them all." Her intestinal fortitude was to her credit, for she went to work as Dartin had instructed, making a fine camp within the aspen grove. Working feverishly, she sought shelter from the worry that strove to overwhelm her. The trees protected their camp from the wind, and soon she had a good fire burning despite the wet wood. Working tirelessly with Dartin, they brought each of the wounded into the sheltering embrace of the grove. The smoke and light of the fire would endanger them, but the coming night and its greater cold would be deadlier still. "Take off their clothes and dry them by the fire," Tarek said. "Our sweat will make us freeze. Dry cloaks and blankets will keep us warmer than layers of wet clothing." Kalor's wound was still excruciating, but he was grateful to be awake and alive. Apparently, the orc's poison was only meant to cause incapacitating pain, and not to kill. He tried to help, but every moment brought more pain. "Stay still," Leander said. "I'm boiling some herbs that will help draw the poison out." "How's your head?" "Just a little headache, that's all. Don't worry." Tarek's swollen calf still held the orc's broken shaft. The healing potion had helped, but its limited magic cured the greatest injuries first, and then the next, and so on, until its power was spent. But he still had many hurts, and the poisoned barb needed to come out. They would have to push it through the rest of the way and cauterize the open wounds. His knives lay red-hot in the fire, awaiting their grim task. Only his eyes betrayed his pain as Leander went to work. Kur lay naked upon a bed of pine boughs, with his gypsy blanket beneath him. He was as close to death as Karina had seen anyone. She couldn't guess why he was still alive. If the potion had done any more than preserve him for a few more hours, it wasn't evident. The orc's broken bolts protruded from his chest, and many of his ribs were twisted grotesquely. How could Dartin hope to save him? Tao lay beside him, and his body was racked by convulsions that grew more and more severe. All that she could do was pray and try to help where she could. Dartin. Dartin was born in Iconerthra, the ice fortress of the northern elves of Arundel, and he was accustomed to the cold and knew its dangers. Kur's body was weakening from loss of blood and shock, and Tao was bleeding inside of himself. Both of them were rapidly nearing death, and all his ability would be needed to save them. He feared that one of them might expire while he was healing the other. It was a difficult decision, but he chose to heal Tao first, because Kur had proven again and again that he was nearly as tough as the bones of the world. Kneeling before Tao, he prayed. The aspen grove was white with frost and snow, and the firelight glinted off the crystalline icicles around the camp in a million reflections of its light. His friends cried out in pain around him. He smelled Leander's herbal remedy brewing in a pot over the fire. He knew his responsibility. He was exhausted, but he had to be strong. He called upon the healing rune. With his hands he inscribed it, and with his voice he invoked it. And lo, Tao's wounds became his wounds, and he nearly crumpled beneath them, but Odin's hands held him upright. Soon he was healed as well. Tao Greylinks would live on. He couldn't think of the pain to come or of weakness. Kneeling beside Kur, he drew the bolts from his chest with Karina's help, and bid her to hold the wounds closed so that the ebbing blood could be slowed. Kur gasped, gurgling through some inner pool of blood. His head had swelled in a dozen places so that he looked only like some grossly deformed parody of himself. He was a broken dwarf. He should have died 100 times over, but some inner fire kept him fighting for life. Trying to pry his axe from his hands proved impossible. His fingers clutched it with strength unimaginable. Dartin invoked the rune, and Kur's grievous hurts became his own, from his punctures to crushed bones and torn flesh. Never before had he attempted to take so much pain into himself. He would never have believed that one body could sustain so much damage. He nearly fell. No human could have suffered so much and survived. Neither could he hope to survive the process alone. But his faith was his power, and Odin's mighty hand once again reached down to steady him, though he wished only to slump lifelessly to the ground. When he'd completed the rune, Kur's most serious wounds were healed, and his breathing was steady. Somehow he found the strength to help the others as well. When he was done, he collapsed. Karina feared that his heart had failed under the strain, but he was only asleep, and he couldn't be awakened. She watched over their patients throughout the night and tended to the fire. To the south, the Red Orcs' drums beat in their savage rhythm. It seemed to her that they had much to tell on this night. Strange animals howled nearby, but the fire seemed to keep them away. They were so vulnerable now, but the gods watched over them, and the night passed by without incident. In the morning, they all awoke. They had new scars to remember the fight, and many minor wounds that would require more time to heal. "How is it that I am whole again?" Kur said. "I was climbing the stairs to the 7 heavens to meet Clangeddin." "The priest healed you," Karina said, "but I think that you may have been dead for a time." Dow woke with a start, for his mind believed that the battle was still joined. Searching for his sword, he suddenly realized that he was unclothed. "What happened? How did I get like this?" "You tried grabbing the bull by its horns," Tarek said, laughing. Remembering the ox, he touched his abdomen, but no pain or visible wound remained. "It's as if the fight had never been. I can't remember anything except being thrown by the Goru." "Dartin's power has grown," Leander said. "Without him, we'd all be dead." "What's wrong with him? Is he hurt?" "No," Karina said. "He's been sleeping for over 10 hours, just like his god must do after he heals." "Where are my clothes?" "Hanging by the fire, dear one, just like everyone else's." And then they all laughed at their nakedness. "We'll rest here as long as we can," Carmen said. "It's a good campsite." "The orcs will be back before long," Tarek said, "but we should have a few days at least, more if it snows." Karina prepared a hearty breakfast with their remaining supplies, and Dow and Kur carved a great stock of meat from the dead Goru. The winter weather would keep it fresh, and they had no way of knowing when they might find good hunting again. Tarek skinned 2 of the Goru and stripped and tanned the hides. "I'll need something other than my nightshirt," Tarek said, "if ever we meet the orcs again." Carmen helped Leander with her knowledge of herbal lore, and together they boiled strips of cloth that they'd cut from the orcs' cloaks and treated them with her tincture. They covered their companions' wounds with the herbal bandages to keep them from festering. Tarek and Kalor tended to the horses and fed them the remaining grain. The animals sought out buried grass, but the hay was meager at best. They would need more adequate food very soon. 3 days passed, and they had rested well and discussed much. Their clothing was dried and repaired, and they were again ready to travel. The cold wind hadn't relented, and they would have to find shelter each night. Retrieving their arrows from the battlefield, they found most of them broken, and they recovered only a handful apiece. The orc's own bolts fit Kur's crossbow well, and he filled his quiver with 20 shafts. He was glad to be alive. Someday he would repay his life debt to Dartin. His hand moved to Korun-Koth, but it slept within his back sheath. Kalor found several flasks of a red liquid upon many of the orcs. "They're healing draughts," Tarek said. "The orcs sometimes carry them on long journeys when they have no shaman with them." They divided the 6 flasks among them. Such powerful potions were not to be squandered. Standing around the fire, they voted on their next course of action. There were many things to consider. If they were going to abandon their quest, it would have to be now, for the winter snows were worsening, and soon the mountain passes would be blocked. If they fled southward, then they would surely face the orcs again. Considering their great interest in the scepter, their enemy would surely seek them out with his irresistible force. If they were to continue with their quest, they might find themselves irrevocably lost in the northern reaches in the middle of winter. If that happened, then they would surely die of exposure or starvation. But if the steppe scepter was in fact driving them towards some mysterious goal, then they had a chance to thwart their enemy's plans and to protect all that they loved. The vote was unanimous. They would go on in spite of the danger. They had come so far that it would be pointless to turn back now. The horses were hungry, but they seemed anxious to travel. When they were ready, Kalor activated the scepter. North still it pointed, and he wondered if they were heading to the top of the world. Tarek took the lead. He was glad to be atop of Windrunner again. His steed's familiar warmth was a welcome companion, and his recent wounds felt stiff and sore. He led them ever northward, as if something within him always knew where north was to be found. Even when they crossed great open valleys of snow with mountains all around them, he led them truly. In 2 days' time, they traveled many miles through thickening snow and penetrating winds. Finally, the scepter seemed to point to their destination, a distant, towering, jagged peak half covered in snow and ice. When they reached the forested valley at its base, they discovered countless wonders. Enormous trees of fir, oak, and ash were there, and they passed by strange woolly beasts with enormous curved tusks and strange trunk-like snouts. The herd consisted of 20 or more animals, and Tarek gave them a wide berth, for surely such immense creatures were not to be trifled with. The valley seemed to be untouched by man or orc, and its creatures had no fear of them. They saw herds of enormous deer and one great predatory cat with 6-inch canines. Karina thought that their teeth looked like short swords, and she named them saber-tooths. Leander and Tarek both agreed that she had a fine knack for naming things, and the cats have been known by that name ever since. They hadn't heard the orcs' drum beats for over 2 days, and it seemed that they had finally traveled beyond their lands. Tarek felt that the recent snows must have concealed any sign of their passage. For the moment, they had escaped the drums of doom. Making a camp at the base of the great mountain, Leander and Dow found a good supply of grass on the wind-blown side of the hill, and they tethered their horses there. Kur built a large fire to ward off the cold. Eating their fill of ox meat, they spoke of the wonders of their journey. The valley seemed to be untouched by civilization. It was pure, virgin, and utterly wild. "Be wary," Tarek said. "We may have escaped from the orcs, but who knows what creatures may yet dwell here. I have heard tales of abominable snowmen living in these mountains." "Then we must trust to our strength in numbers," Kur said. "No wandering off alone." His eyes were on Kalor when he said it, but Kalor was the only one among them who didn't notice it. Winter was in full swing, and they would have to build a shelter to survive. That is, if they didn't complete their mission in record time. In case they might need edible food without fire, they smoked a large portion of their remaining meat and filled their packs to their limits. It would stay fresh indefinitely in that frozen land. The cook fire attracted predators, but they were wary and stayed at a distance. Kur made sure that their fire remained large and burning. "No self-respecting bear would come near this fire," he said to Karina, "but just in case, I'll keep my crossbow handy." "See that you do." It was clear that she was neither warm nor amused. The forest shielded them from the wind, and their camp was a little warmer beneath the tree's gigantic limbs. They assigned guard shifts and prepared for the night. Huddling with their horses by the fire, they spoke of many things and reflected on their journey. "When we return home," Kur said, "I shall take you to visit my home under the volcano. My father's mushroom farm is beautiful this time of year, and he plants special ones that glow with emerald light to celebrate Baldric's birthday. What do you think, dear one? Will we have time to visit the kingdom of the mountain dwarves? If he can get us back alive, Dow said, I'll follow him wherever he wishes. And when we're through, we'll have to get back to the business that we were working on before this mess all started. But only she and Dow knew what she meant. Kalor's scepter now points to some place far above us, Tarek said. We must come up with a plan for ascending the mountain. I've climbed since I was a small lad, Kur said. I can show everyone how to climb as a team, using one rope between them. When one has found a safe and secure point on the rock face, the other climbs while the leader accesses safety. Once the first team has ascended, they can secure or drop a safety line down to the next team. The pairs should be well matched in size and strength. What dangers will we face? Carmen asked. There are many. The most important rule is 3 points of contact. 2 hands and 1 foot, or 2 feet and 1 hand, must be in contact with the mountain at all times. Anything less is suicide. 2 feet in the shoulder or the buttocks is okay when the leader is assisting his partner. Watch for loose rocks or shiny stones covered in ice. Test each handhold before putting your weight on it, and we should be okay. It looks pretty cold up there. We must reach our destination before dark. If we can't find shelter on the mountainside, then we'll freeze to death. Then we're walking right back into the dragon's mouth. Most of the mountain isn't as steep as it seems. We'll be able to walk much of the way, but if we need to reach the summit, we'll have to climb as I described. Speaking of these things long into the night, they rested as they could. The morning broke cold and bright. The sun reflected harshly off the snow but didn't warm them. Where they were going, the horses couldn't follow, so Tarek released them into the valley. They would have to find food where they could. Alger would see to their protection. They concealed their saddles, excess gear, and other supplies at the base of a gnarled tree once struck by lightning. That way they would be able to find their gear, even if it was covered by deepening snows. Hefting their packs filled with their remaining food, water, and survival items, they made certain that their weapons and other equipment were well tied down. We secure our equipment with twine and rope, Kur said. This will prevent loose gear from coming loose and injuring climbers below you. Choosing their teams, they secured their safety lines and climbed. By noon they were only halfway to the crest, and Tarek called a halt. After eating a quick meal, they began their climb before their sweating bodies could grow cold. 3 more grueling hours, and they reached a great cleft in the mountain. A massive plate of rock had slid sideward off the peak, coming to rest to form a vaulted opening. The cave was invisible from the ground, and would make an excellent lair for any number of legendary beasts. When Kalor again brought the scepter to life, it burned brightly, and into the cave's frightening, gaping maw it pointed. Frigid winds buffeted them, screaming like tormented banshees crying out, "Go back!" But they had come too far to go back. The cave was their destination. It meant immediate shelter. It could also hold imminent death. What dangers they might find could not be known. Perhaps some powerful guardian protected the Duaredheim staff. But the cold was stealing their breath, and they'd never be able to descend before nightfall. So into the dragon's mouth they went. That's where we'll end episode 31 on page 331. Next episode 32, we begin on 332 with the chapter entitled Darek al-Luan. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the reading. As always, read Curse Rage, Part 1 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga by me, and the accompanying novels that follow The Drums of Doom, The Last Admiral, and the up-and-coming Ice Moon. Thank you, and have a great night.